Nobody minds being recorded, but welcome everybody. I'll get started as people trickle in. I'm hoping we'll get a few more. I just ask that please go on, if you can, just mute your microphone during during the presentation, just to cut down background noise. But then if you have any questions or need to interrupt, please feel free to come off mute, or I'll also watch chat. Ro, did you have a question?
Yeah, are we going to get a copy of the deck?
Yeah, I could post a copy of the slides for sure.
Cool. That's it.
I'll send out. Actually, did you sign up through Meetup? If you came in through our Meetup or Eventbrite, then we'll send out a copy of the deck. If not, just email me. Well, my email's on the screen there, todd@bocacode.com. If you don't get a copy of the deck, and I'll also be posting a link to the video as well. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is Agile for Dummies. We're going to be talking about Agile, Scrum, Kanban, and a few other things. My name is Dr. Todd Albert. Please just call me Todd. I'm the founder and lead instructor of Boca Code, a new code school here in Boca Raton. And I am happy to see you guys all and happy to talk to you about Agile. One disclaimer I want to give: I am actually not used to giving talks on things where I don't feel like I'm an expert in them. I am not an expert in Agile. Okay, I am not. I don't have any specific high-level training in Agile or Kanban or Scrum. I do have. I don't have any kind of special certifications or anything, but I will still do my best to try and answer any of your questions. I can, if you want, I could provide you documentation if you need to that says that you attended this training. I'm happy to do that. I got, a message in chat about that. So please know, just contact me after. But what is, let's just jump in. So the challenge here is that, what we want to do in the tech field is we want to create useful and efficient products, and we want to do them as efficiently as possible in terms of time, right? And prior to 2001, there was a study done that 85% of all software projects were ending in failure. This is prior to 2001, which is ridiculous, right? 85% failure rate is huge. And what the research found is that it was actually being caused by this top-down management style. And that top-down management is way too slow. It's not reactive enough. And what we need is to be able to continually and iteratively improve throughout the development process. So in 2001, there came this Agile Manifesto. And the idea here is, so there's actually 10 values here on the graph, and all 10 of these are important. Okay, it's not trying to say that the ones on the right are not important. It's just saying the ones on the left are more important. If you want to be really agile, you want to be really efficient, then you should favor individuals and interactions over the specific processes and tools that they're using. You want to favor working software over comprehensive documentation, right? Spend the time making good quality software, not worrying so much about documentation. Now, this isn't to say don't write any documentation. It's just saying that making the working software is more important. The collaborating with the customer is more important than detailed contract negotiations. Responsiveness to change is more important than following a detailed plan. And again, this isn't to say that having a plan is bad. It's just saying being able to be agile and respond to changes is more important than sticking to hard fast to a specific plan. So that's the manifesto. And what they found, and we'll go into how this all works, but basically what they found is that people who have adopted Agile have a 4 times more success rate, 4 times higher success rate. And it's even higher for larger projects. Larger projects, it's a 6x success rate. And what's even more startling is that the failure rate was cut in third. So far, far fewer projects fail and much more projects succeed when you use Agile. So I want to go through, there's all different ways of describing this. And one of the ways is using just these basic principles, and people describe these differently. There's all different versions of this. So I put together these 12 principles. That number one is we want to satisfy our customer or whoever our stakeholder is through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So for example, Marielle and I are working on an app right now. It's going to be a 12-week project. We're only 2 weeks into the project, and already we're going to give tomorrow our customer a working model that they can see, a working demo that they can play with, because we want to have this early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Principle number two is to welcome changing requirements even late in the development stage, right? Because this gives the customer an advantage. So think about this. In the old days, a software developer might say, well, that wasn't in scope. You didn't tell me that in the original plan, so I'm not doing it. That's the bad way. The good way is, oh, you have a change order late in the game. Okay, we're going to do our best because I know that's what's best for your company. So being able to respond quickly to changes, even late in the development process, is very important. Principle number three sounds a lot like principle number one, right? Deliver working software frequently, right? I want to emphasize this. This is very similar to number one, and that's by design. I want to emphasize how important it is to get software out that works frequently. This is one of the main things with Agile. Number four, the owners or the stakeholders, whether it's your marketing team or whoever it is, they will develop and work. They work closely with the development team throughout the project. So there's this constant collaboration. And Heidi just asked, do you allow changes during a sprint? Usually, Heidi, once you're in the sprint, you shouldn't, the changes should be based on what's happening in that sprint, only to make that sprint more efficient. But really the changes will come at the end of the sprint, when you're looking forward to the work that's coming ahead. And it depends on the methodology that you use. So Agile is this philosophy, and then there are different frameworks we're going to talk about, one being Scrum, that we use to implement Agile. And I think that's what, Heidi's question is specific to that. But let's talk more about these Agile principles, and then we can get into how to implement them specifically. So principle 5, developers should be trusted. They should be motivated. They should be given the environment and support that they need to thrive. Okay. And this is also an important one. And every one of us has probably met a developer at some point in our lives, or in recent history, that made some comment like, yeah, I'm working for this company, but they don't even realize that they're a tech company. They're really a tech company, but they don't act like it. Right? We've all heard that, right? What do they mean by that? What they mean is that as a developer, I'm not given autonomy. I'm not being motivated properly. I'm not being, given the environment and the support that I need to thrive, right? And that might sound petty. It might be like, oh, these developers, oh my God, they're so high maintenance. They want, this and that. This is not about pinball tables. This is not about having foosball. This is about creating an agile environment where the developers can take the ball and run. And when you're in an environment that's set up that way, you work so much more efficiently. That's what this research is showing, right? There's no argument. No one is going to argue if Agile is good or bad. Agile has been proven over and over and over again for the last 20 years. It works. You want to do this. So if you're in an environment as a developer where you're not being trusted and motivated, where you're not being given the environment and support you need, it's time to to either get the hell out of there, or to tell your management, look, you need to adopt Agile methodology, and you're not. This is something that we need to do. If you're not, you're going to die. You're not going to be able to compete in the marketplace if you're not being agile, period. That's the game. And it's not a matter of being high maintenance as a developer. It's a matter of being successful, right? Principle number 6 is a tough one in the days of COVID right now, but face-to-face conversations are proven to be the best and most effective way to communicate within a team. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to be face-to-face every day, but ideally, COVID aside right now, the most ideal development team is going to be a development team that is co-located, meaning they're working out of the same office and they're not spread around the building. They're sitting together. If you want to have the most effective team, your developers are all in one room and you break down every barrier to communication that you can. I just spoke to someone today that told me, oh, I have one developer that's in this country and one developer here and one developer there and one developer there. And I was just like, okay, I hope that's working for you, because it's not agile. The best way is to have them together. Principle number 7, promote a pace that can be sustained continuously. If you want to be as agile as possible, which is as efficient as you possibly can, you don't want to work your developers more than 40 hours a week. It's been proven. If you work your developers at a steady rate that they can maintain, you're going to churn out your product a lot faster. And I keep saying developers, this methodology, it could be applied to manufacturing, it could be applied in almost every scenario, right? But keeping a steady pace that can be kept up, think marathon, right? Not sprint, even though we do things in agile called sprints, but it's think about that marathon pace. You want to work your team at a pace that they can continue indefinitely, and that you'll get the most work out of them. So if you're in a company where they're like, we're just going to work really hard this quarter and then things will slow down, that's a lie. Things never slow down. And if you push your team really hard for too long, they'll get burned out and you will lose productivity. And I've seen this. I've worked at a company where we worked 100+ hours for 3 months straight, and then for the next couple of months we were worthless. The whole development team barely got anything done. Principle 8, continuous focus on quality code and excellent design enhances agility, right? So gone are the days of saying, okay, well, this isn't good, but we're just going to push it out anyway and we'll fix it later. That's called tech debt, and you want to avoid tech debt whenever you can. Principle 9 is to simplify, right? To maximize the work not done. If you can do things simply, do things simply. Among developers, we have an expression that lazy coders are the best coders. And it always sounds bad, but really the meaning is, if you can find a way to do something in a simple, easy way with 1 or 2 lines of code or using a library that already exists, that's better. So they say lazy coders are the best coders. And I've found this to be true almost exclusively. Principle 10, the best architecture, the best code, the best design comes from self-organized teams, right? So if you give your development team autonomy to organize themselves, right? You're not dictating, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, you're going to do this. You let your development team dictate that, you will get the best results. So you'll see this again, this idea of a self-organized team. Principle 11 of 12, the team regularly reflects on how they can become more efficient and adjusts accordingly, right? So they get together as a team internally, self-organized, and say, hey, how can we be doing this better? And you don't have somebody from the outside dictating that. And then principle 12, this is the exact same slide as principle number 1, because I want to emphasize this. And I said principle number 3 was very similar too. The goal, the most important principle in Agile is to satisfy that customer with early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So these are the guiding principles. So how the heck do we do it, right? So the overall approach, the high level approach, is when a customer comes to you and they tell you the requirements, you go through this process of, analysis of those requirements and figuring out, how we're going to build it, and then you develop, and then you test, and then you deploy, and that's called a release. And back in the olden days, this was done through what's called a waterfall process, where, each step waited for the step before, and then all the way at the end of the process, you'd finally release. And this was maybe a 6-month thing. Now what we do is we do these in short sprints, where we go through a small portion of work, we go through this whole cycle, and then we do it again and again and again, and we release continually and frequently. So that's Agile in a nutshell. That's the overall principles of Agile. And I know that I went through it really fast, but it's going to be reinforced now as we go into some of these frameworks that we use in order to employ Agile. So just to reiterate, Agile is a way to make your company more efficient, make you more successful, and make you less likely to fail. So 100%, everything from the first 18 slides, everything there you absolutely should be doing. There's no question, there's no argument. Everybody in the world agrees Agile is the way to go. Now, how do you do it? That's where people differ on exactly how to do it. And it really depends on you, it depends on your team, it depends on your company, it depends on how you work. One of the ways that people employ Agile methodologies is called Scrum. So for the next few minutes, we're going to be specifically talking about Scrum as it relates to Agile, right? This is just Scrum. So Scrum is the most popular of all the Agile frameworks. It facilitates development of complex projects in particular, right? It's really designed to help you develop complex things, right? So it is a framework. It is not a specific methodology. Therefore, it's a little bit more abstract and a little bit less prescriptive. Although for me, I still think Scrum is more prescriptive than a lot of the other Agile methodologies, even though they claim they're like, oh, it's not prescriptive, just kind of do as you please, but you have to do these things. So to me, it's more prescriptive than most of them. It came out actually before Agile. It was first described by Schwarber and Sutherland in 1995. And you could see the up-to-date, like the latest Scrum guidelines at scrumguides.org, which is, it's designed to be very readable. It's designed to, it's only like 2 pages long. It's very simple. And that's one of the guiding principles of Scrum, is that it's supposed to be easy to learn. It's supposed to be, easy to learn, but takes a lifetime to master kind of thing. Scrum basically breaks down to, you have 3 team roles, which we'll go through. You have 5 events and 3 artifacts. So this is what I'm saying. They say it's not prescriptive, but that sounds pretty prescriptive to me. The work is broken into short periods called sprints that typically last between 1 and 4 weeks. A sprint should never be longer than 30 days. A sprint should never be shorter than about 5 days, right? There's a sweet spot about 1 to 2 weeks. Some sprints, some teams prefer longer 3-4 week sprints. Of course, it depends on your specific team and the specific project. And we'll get a little bit more into sprints in a minute, but I want to get through some of these concepts because it's kind of a chicken and an egg. You can't really talk about who does what until you talk about what they're doing, and you can't talk about what they're doing until you talk about who does what. But in Agile, not just in Scrum, we often employ this idea of stories and epics, but in particular in Scrum, it's really important, this idea of stories and epics. So what is a story? When you're given features, you have a list of features or tasks that you need to build for your product. We prefer those to be broken down and written in terms of from the perspective of the user and told as a story. So instead of saying like, oh, For our school, we want the students to be able to view their billing history, right? You might write this down as student billing history on a task list to give to your development team, but they would rewrite that as a registered student, I should be able to view my billing history to see how I'm being billed. So that's turning a task into a story, right? And the goal of the user is written from the perspective of the user in simple business language, right? And the stories usually are broken into 3 parts. They're actually, you probably didn't realize this seeing it, but now when you look, you see that it specifies what role is going to benefit. Here, it's a registered student. What that benefit will be, viewing their payment history, and the reason why. You oftentimes, you can't always have this, but it's preferred to have this. Why are we building this? We're building it so that the student can see how they're being billed, right? In this case, so it's the what, the who, the what, and the why. And oftentimes, that'll be written on a card, and then on the back of the card, you write your acceptance criteria. And the acceptance criteria is what conditions need to be met for this feature to be considered done, right? A user should be able to see payment history for 2 years, right? For example. So those are stories. Epics are basically big giant stories, right? They're larger feature requests, right? When a client asks for a dashboard, or a client asks for reporting, those are always 2 where it's like, yeah, you got to give me more details than that, right? What does the dashboard look like? What pieces are you going to have on there, right? Those are large feature requests, right? So they have to be broken down into smaller components in order to be estimated, right? That's what an epic is. So here, for example, it's, as a staff member, I should be able to set up a new student account. Well, what does that look like? Am I adding their classes? Am I adding their billing history? So it's usually their larger features. They need to be broken down into smaller tasks before they can really be estimated. That's the way I see an epic. So now we're still in this idea of Scrum, right? We're talking about Agile. We're talking about Scrum as one framework in order to employ Agile at your company. And we said that Scrum has 3 roles, 3 artifacts, and 5 events. So let's first talk about the artifacts. And some of these cross outside of Scrum, and you see these elsewhere, and particularly this one. It's called the Product Backlog. And this is just a list of tasks or features or bugs or epics that need to be done. These are things that need to be built, right? It's basically like a big, it's the wish list, right? It's the scope of the whole project. So it could have some user stories, it could have some requirements, some defects or bugs that need to be fixed, right? So this is the product backlog. And in Scrum, what we do is we take parts of those product backlog and we say, okay, this week or during the next sprint, we're going to work on these particular items from this. Usually this is ordered. Usually we put this in the order of priority. So things at the top would be higher priority than things lower down. So we take typically the things from the top and we put them into a sprint backlog in Scrum, which is a subset of your product backlog. And these are tasks that are selected for the upcoming sprint or the ongoing sprint. And so that's the second of the artifacts. There's the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and then the third is what's called the product increment, or the new version of the product, right? And this is you've now released a new version of the product that has some added business value. And in Scrum, this should be shippable. This should be in go-to-market ready status when you do this, right? And a product increment oftentimes slices through the whole product itself. So for example, with showing the student's billing history, you need to connect to your payment processor, you need to connect to your database, you need to connect to your API, you need front end, you need user authentication. There's all these different parts of your app that this one feature is slicing through. So you want to make sure that your team is able to work on all of those pieces. So you want a team that's what's called a feature team, as opposed to a component team. A component team would be someone where they're like, oh, we only work on billing. Oh, we only work on backend. We only work on integration with the billing service. We only work on the database. Those are component teams. Those are not favored in Scrum. In Scrum, you favor a feature team where you have people on the team that can work on the entire project A to Z. That's preferred. Okay, so those are the artifacts. Now we get into the roles. And the roles in Scrum, there's only 3. You have the product owner, and the product owner is like a liaison between the customer or the stakeholders or the top brass or the marketing team or whoever the customer is, and the development team or the Scrum team. They're like the liaison, they're the go-between. And what they do is they control that product backlog, that list of things to be built. That's their job. Their job is just to get from the customer, okay, here's what we want built. They put it into the product backlog. They can control the priority of things, right? This customer is saying we better have this right away, so they can move it up in the priority list. But that's where their role stops. They only control the product backlog. And it's the development team that then takes those pieces out of the product backlog and puts it into the sprint backlog, which is what they own. So the development team owns the sprint backlog. They're self-organized, as I said. They work independently. So they're not really beholden to the rest of the company. They work as their own team. They have a flat hierarchy, right? So they're all equals. And ideally, you want people that have broad capabilities, that are less specialized. So this is oftentimes represented graphically by a T instead of an I, and it's just the shape. It's not a like an initial. An I is somebody who's very deeply focused and specialized in one field, whereas a T is they might have specialization, but they also have a broad base of knowledge, right? So they're a T versus an I who just has that, I only do AWS or something like that. I only do database work. So you want Ts, people who can do a little bit of everything, but maybe they have their own specialization.
It's a pretty big company. They have 250 employees. That's an
Excuse
insurance
me?
company.
I think that somebody's not on mute. Sorry. Yeah, if you're not on mute, please go on mute just so we can avoid the background noise. I'm trying to cover a lot of stuff quickly. And so the third role in Scrum, the third role is called the Scrum Master. And sometimes this is actually a member of the development team. It can be. This is considered a management role, but it's very important that they're not managing from on high. This is not remember in Agile, there's nothing top down. It's very flat. So they're considered a servant leader. Their job is to make sure that the development team has everything they need to succeed, right? So they're kind of like they should be seen as a servant and beholden to the development team. But they're also a Scrum evangelist. They're trying to keep the development team like, hey, don't forget to use Scrum and don't forget all of our Agile philosophy. So they keep them on task, but as more of a servant, as somebody who's helping rather than somebody who's trying to be a boss, right? All right, so now we get into the Scrum events. And the Scrum events I mentioned, it all focuses around a sprint, which is the main Scrum event, which is, as I said, typically it's 1 to 4 weeks long, right? Never longer than that. It should never be longer. And all of the other events occur within that sprint. So the sprint is the high level event. And then within it, you also have the sprint planning, the daily scrum, and then at the end, you have a sprint review and a sprint retrospective. So let's talk quickly about each of those. The sprint planning is where the team defines what they're going to be building, what they're going to be working on during the sprint, and how they're going to execute it. So there's some planning, there's some design perhaps, but it's really, essentially taking items from the product backlog, putting it into the sprint backlog, and coming up with a plan, and then jump to it. Then they have a daily meeting called the daily scrum. You meet every day to inspect the work, to talk about how they can adapt to be more efficient. Some scrum teams that I've been on, they stick to this yesterday, today blocks format. And this is where the Scrum Master can really be the enforcer here, making sure that in your daily meeting, which is usually not in front of a computer, you're usually standing up, you're maybe at a whiteboard, or at some kind of project overview board. You want to have high availability of data, right? All the information right there in front of you, and limited distractions. And typically each person on the team says, here's what I did yesterday, here's what I'm doing today, and these are the things that are blocking my progress. And it's not a chance to really brainstorm about solutions. It's just meant to be factual. Here's what I'm doing. And then you could go break off into a team with somebody who can help you solve your problems, or unstuck you, if you will. So that was the daily scrum. And now we have, at the end of the week or the end of the sprint, after the work is done, you get to the sprint review. And this is where you bring the customer or the stakeholder in, and all the members, your product owner, your scrum master, everyone's there, and you review the work. This is not really meant to be a product demo, but you do review the work that was done, and then plan what's the next steps. What is the future work going to look like for the next sprint? And then the final event is called the sprint retrospective. And this is done just with the Scrum team. There's no outside people. There's no product customers or anything in there. And it's really just the Scrum team discussing, okay, how did we do, what processes, and how could we have done them more efficiently, so that for the next sprint, we're going to be more efficient, right? So that's, in a not so quick nutshell, that's what Scrum is. And just a reminder, we're talking about Agile here. Agile, 100% you should be doing. Scrum is one way to do it, right? So just what we just went through with Scrum, that's one possible way of becoming Agile. Another way that I want to talk about is called Kanban. And Kanban is not so much a framework as a process management tool. It's based on lean manufacturing principles, which came out of Japan from Toyota. So Kanban is actually Japanese. Kan means visual, and ban means card. So this is a very visual system using cards. And it's also important to note that it's pull-based. And this is something that I didn't always understand about Kanban. And I think one of the reasons why in the past I've struggled to really truly implement Kanban is I didn't understand the idea of pull-based. So let me explain what pull-based means, because it's very fundamental to how Kanban should work properly. So think about this. If you have a grocery store, you want to always have fresh milk stocked in your grocery store, right? But you don't want an unlimited supply of milk, because then you're going to be throwing it out. Oh, Ro said it's actually Kanban. Thank you, Ro. I did not know that. Kanban. I think you're right, though. You want to always have fresh milk in your grocery store, but you don't want an unlimited supply, because you don't have unlimited customers. You want to have the amount supplied at any given time that you're going to sell between now and your next shipment, right? So you don't have to throw away any milk before it spoils. That's the concept of lean manufacturing. Lean actually came out of, as I mentioned, out of Japan. It's Toyota wanted to produce cars at the same rate that they were consumed, right? So if you think about idea of pull. If you imagine cars going onto the line being manufactured and coming off the line, going out into the factory floor and being sold, and I know that's a great simplification, but let's just go with it. You know, there's a few steps along the way, and then finally a car is sold. In a pull system, the car that leaves the lot, you know, the customer drives away with a car that pulls another one into the lot to be sold, right? So if you have 100 cars in your lot, one sells, you want another one to come in. That's pulling everything along that manufacturing flow, right? So you don't want to be manufacturing them faster, because then you have a bunch of cars that you're storing and you're paying for inventory faster than you're selling it. So in an ideal world, you would be manufacturing cars at the exact same rate that they were selling. And the way to do that is not by trying to push the cars through, but by pulling them, that every time one is sold, another one is coming through that manufacturing process. So keep that in mind when we go into Kanban. Thank you, Ro. So the idea of lean is to minimize the cycle time. You know, that for us in development, it's analysis, design, implementation, deployment, because we want to produce valuable software faster, right? That's agile. So with Kanban, Kanban is very developer friendly. It's a fairly simple process. There's no mandatory events like you have with Scrum. You have one single product backlog. You do daily stand-ups typically just for bottlenecks, just to clear up bottlenecks, and there are no defined roles. So compared to Scrum, this is a much simpler method. I actually prefer Kanban over Scrum personally, but it's just the way I work. I'm very visual, and Kanban is very visual. So you work on a board that looks something like this, right? So you have your product backlog here on the left. And then when you want to take one of these user stories or one of these tasks, you move it to the right, and then it goes into planning and coordination. And then once it's been planned and coordinated, it moves to the design process. And once it goes through design, it's ready to be developed. And once it goes through developed, it gets ready to go through to see if it's ready to be accepted. Does it meet the acceptance criteria? And then if it does, it's done. But remember, this is a pull system. So that means as soon as one of these cards is pulled from acceptance into finished, the developer should be pushing one from developed into accept, and it should be pulling the next cards through, right? So you should constantly have this left to right flow, right? As a card is finished, another one, all the other ones are moving along. And that might not seem realistic until I show you how it's really employed in a moment. These Kanban boards can be tactical or digital. One of the most common and preferred methods is often just using a whiteboard with Post-its, which I absolutely love. That's my favorite way to go. With all of us working from home these days, that's not as practical. And if you have a team that's remote or partially remote, it's really, you know, a lot of people prefer to have a digital version of this. And there are a lot of options, like LeanKit is a very popular one, as is Trello, and there's hundreds. But very often, one of the best systems is just a whiteboard with Post-it notes, or even a window. You know, if you have a window in your office or some kind of glass surface, they're really good. Another concept in Kanban is having what are called work in progress limits. So in other words, in each column, you're only allowed to have a maximum number of cards per column. And so where do you set those limits? Do you just say, okay, well, one per person, right? Like in progress, right? Under development, you know, do you just have one card per developer, or, you know, just one at a time? Like everyone's working on the same one. So there's this question of how do we set these limits? And typically what you do is you look at your slowest step in the process, and you set it to your team size plus some buffer, maybe 50% your team size. So if you have 4 people on your team, you know, your slowest step might have a limit of 6, which is 4 plus 50%. And then you adjust the others proportionally, right? Because you really want to keep the focus on a single item working its way through, but you also want to have additional items there so that if an item gets stuck or you have multiple developers working on it, you know, you can push multiple cards through. So here's an example of setting those limits. We set the ends don't matter. Those can be as big as they want. But in the planning and coordination here, we're allowing 4. In the design phase, we're allowing 6. In the develop phase, which is maybe our slowest phase, we're allowed 8. And then in the accept phase, we're allowed 2. So 2 cards waiting to be accepted is the maximum, right? Now, again, for this to be allowed to pull, it's really hard to have cards in the develop phase, for example, right? You know, think about this. You're a developer, you're coding along, and you're supposed to be done the exact second that, you know, a card gets pulled out of the accept column. It's not really practical, right? So oftentimes what's done is these columns are broken into a doing and done column. So each column actually has two sub columns, doing and done. And so this is what a real Kanban board would look like, where you have, you know, these 2 cards here, we're in the middle of planning and coordinating them. These have been planned and coordinated and are ready to move into the design phase. These ones in the design phase are done and they're ready to move into develop phase. These in the develop phase are done, etc. So you can see here, as soon as we have a couple of these cards, we're at the maximum here in accept, as soon as one of these cards moves out, one of the ones from develop can move in. And that's how this works in a pull system with these limits. And now putting this all together, this is the way it really looks, and it allows you to find bottlenecks. So right here in the design phase, I have a card that's blocked, meaning I'm waiting for something. I can't proceed until I get some information or an asset from a client or something. And here in the planning and coordination, I'm now jammed up because I have more than 4 cards. I'm past my limit here. So where do you think, you know, somebody comes off mute, come off mute if you think you can see, based on this board, where the bottleneck is? You should be able to look at this board and know, okay, I see where the bottleneck is based on the information. Or put it in chat if you think you know, put it in chat. Who's the problem? where do we, go ahead?
Is it planning?
No.
Okay.
No, it's a good guess, right? It's red, right?
Yeah, because they're over their limit.
The red is saying they're over their limit, right? Yeah, Jason got it. Jason said it's accept, right? So here in accept, we're at our limit, right? We've got 2 cards, which is the maximum. We're waiting maybe for our, you know, for our Scrum Master or our well, sorry, you don't have, in Scrum, you don't have, I'm sorry, in Kanban, you don't have the roles, but maybe we're waiting for, you know, somebody to look at these cards and make sure that they meet their acceptance criteria and push them into finish. As soon as one moves out of this accept column, we've got 4 here in develop ready to move in, right? Design, they're not doing anything. Design is sitting here waiting, right? So yeah, planning should be moving these, you know, should probably move one of these cards from done into design, so design could be doing work, but accept here is definitely a bottleneck in this case. So this is really useful if you use this properly. If you use Kanban properly, it's very useful for seeing where your bottlenecks are, where your slowdowns are, and so forth. So here, my design team is sitting around not doing anything. I could say, hey, you know, they need to take these cards from planning and coordination and start, you know, opening this up and getting them working, right? And whoever's in charge of checking these acceptance criteria, they better get on that, right? So it's very visual. I see, oh, there's a block here, there's a blockage here, there's a bottleneck here. We got to get opening these up. So Kanban, very visual, one of the reasons I love it. Very useful, very simple. What's actually very common though is to use a combination of Kanban and Scrum that some people call Scrumban, or I guess it should be Scrumban based on what Ro said. So this is a hybrid of Scrum and Kanban. The developers use Scrum, but they use the Kanban board to visualize their flow. Very popular. All right. So those are two frameworks that we can use to bring Agile into our companies. Another couple of concepts that I wanted to go over related to Agile, one is called Agile Estimation. And in Agile Estimation, we're trying to figure out from the product backlog how long each item is going to take. So the first thing we do is we want to refine. We go through the backlog and we try and break the bigger tasks into smaller, more easy to estimate items, or ideally into user stories, right? Smaller, easier to estimate user stories. Sorry for that text there that doesn't belong. And rather than try and give absolute time units, this is going to take 8 hours, this is going to take 4 hours, we found it's much more efficient and much quicker to estimate using using relative time units. So there's 3 popular ways of doing this. One is using the Fibonacci sequence, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. And another is to use an exponential series, 0, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. So the numbers are doubling as they go up, right? Either way, or the methodology that I always liked was just t-shirt sizes, right? You know, you're basically just trying to say, is this a very small task, or is it a very large task? Is it, you know, or is it somewhere in the middle? And you want to, the development team should be the ones that are doing this estimation. And then the product owner, in the case of Scrum, should be then, it should help them prioritize. And one thing that you can do then, once you have these estimates, is do a cost benefit analysis where, as a company, you could say, all right, we really want this item, but it's going to cost too much. It's not worth it, right? And so you could start looking at how much time is something going to take versus what the benefit will be for it. And things that are high benefit, low time estimate, you do those first. And things that are low benefit, high time estimate, you don't do those ever, you know, if at all. So that's an easy way to do a cost benefit analysis on this. And Neha asked, what does a 0 mean? That's a really good question. A 0 is just a way of saying like, oh, this will take almost no time, right? Like 1 line of code, just throw it in. It's like nothing, right? I'll do it for free, basically. So good question. And then, sorry. And then, you know, a 1 is something that's like, yeah, it'll probably take, you know, a very short amount of time. How much? We don't want to say. We don't want to give these absolute time units, right? That's the whole point. But the idea is, you know, for one developer, a 1 might be 10 minutes. For another, a 1 might be an hour. But the whole idea is a 2 is twice that. And a 5 is 5 times the size of a 1, right? So these things go up very quickly because it's a lot harder. You know, if you think about, if you're going to go drive, you know, 10 minutes down the road, it's really easy to estimate how long it'll take. But if you're going to go drive, you know, 3 states away, it's a lot harder to get it exact. But you know, it's going to be, you know, that's an 8. You know, driving across the country, that's a 13, right? Driving, you know, to the next county over, that's a 2, right? Driving to the next town, that's a 1. You know, so these are just relative sizes. And going to your neighbor's house, that's a 0. One way that we do this estimation is planning poker. It's what it's called, and it's kind of a fun but democratic way of coming up with these estimates. So what you do is each developer, you describe the task, and then each developer throws down a card at the same time, giving their estimate. So like here, you know, one person threw a 3, one person threw a 5, one person threw an 8. And then what we do is we ignore the 5 person. We ask the 3, like, why do you think this is only a 3? And then we ask the 8 person, why do you think this is an 8? And they explain the 3 might, the 8 might be like, oh, well, we've never done this part before, so we don't know how long that's going to take. We don't have anything like that in our application. And then the 3 could be like, yeah, but we've done something similar before like this, and I don't think it'll be that bad, right? So they both explain their points, and then everybody picks up their cards, and then you throw again. And you keep doing this, and you keep explaining yourself until you get consensus, and then that's how you rate the difficulty or the time estimate for the task. Other useful tools, again, removing barriers. You want to co-locate your development team to minimize barriers to communication. You want to maximize access to info. So like, for example, having the Kanban board, right here, right where all the developers are, that is maximizing information, access to information, and co-locating your development team, if possible, is really useful. Pair programming has been shown to be incredibly effective. A lot of times managers, when they first hear this, they're like, wait, you want 2 of my developers to work on one thing? That's like double the cost. And it turns out it's not. It's actually super effective. You actually literally sit together like this, and Marielle and I have done this, and we've been worked with other people in this way as well. And one person codes and the other one literally looks over their shoulder and is doing code review as they're writing. And it's unbelievably effective. You write so much faster and so much more accurate code doing this. And the second person is asking questions. Why are you doing that? And so what you end up with is rock solid quality code coming out of this, way faster usually than if these 2 people were working on their own code and then had to review each other's code later or test it later. You're actually really effective doing this. But you should never enforce this. It should always be the choice, right? Because you remember, your development team should be self-organizing. So it should be up to your development team if they want to do this. And then there's a tool that's called Slack, but it's not the Slack that we use for communication. It's really like, I like to call it Backburner, because to me, that's what it is. These are low priority tasks that the team can chip away on when other tasks are poorly estimated or if they're blocked. So if you get to a point where you're like, you've done all your work and maybe you're stuck with something or you don't know what to do next, there's always this list, the Slack items or these back burner items where you can continue to work on and chip away. And then the last one I wanted to talk about is something called test-driven development. You'll sometimes hear it called red, green, or TDD, test-driven development. And the idea for this is when you're given a task, you write a test for it first. It's an automated or unit test, and you write the test first. So you say, okay, when this task is done, the code should be able to pass this test that checks to make sure that that works. Then you write just enough code to make it pass that test. And then you go back and you refactor that code to make it good. And you keep running it through, making sure that it's constantly passing. And this is actually a really effective way of getting really high quality code. The tests are, some people like to say the tests are not biased, but that's not true, because we're writing the tests, so they are biased, but they're way less biased than developers are. And they tend to find defects or bugs that developers miss. So this is a really good way to write code. And that, in a nutshell, is Agile and Scrum and Kanban and all kinds of things. So hopefully you guys got something out of it. Please check us out at bocacode.com, and I'll open it up to questions now.
Hello, I have a question.
Hey, Terrence. Yeah, go ahead.
You had kind of hit on this earlier, but just looking at the current situation we're in with working virtually, how might you see the use of these tools, especially Agile Scrum, changing? How will they adapt? how will new tools be created, virtual tools, in order to, keep up with this?
Yeah, well, Terrence, that was a great question, and I appreciate you asking that. And I want to reiterate that we, everything I said tonight was very much like, put your developers in a room together, give them face to face. That's the ideal scenario, of course. But there's a lot of teams forever that have been remote, and actually, us developers, when we barely even noticed when we went into quarantine, right? Because a lot of us were working remote. It's like I'm sitting at a computer with a keyboard here, or I'm sitting at a computer with a keyboard there. Although, some of us also really miss that face-to-face interaction. But having those daily meetings, Terrence, those daily face-to-face meetings, starting the morning out with a quick meeting with your development team is very effective, even over Zoom. You can also do screen sharing to do pair programming. The tools exist. There's no, you asked what tools are going to be developed. The tools are already there because there've always been, there've been remote teams for years now. So there are plenty of tools, and that's why, there are so many online project management tools that offer like Kanban boards. I mentioned a couple in the comments here. In the chat, there's a ton of others people are throwing up there. Using Google Hangouts. You can just have a chat open. Mariella and I, we do a lot over Slack, and we'll jump into a quick Slack video call, share screen, show each other code. We Slack each other constantly throughout the day. Working together. So even when we were sitting in an office, 8 feet apart, we were still slacking each other constantly, because you don't always want to interrupt somebody when they're, if they're head down coding, you don't always want to interrupt their flow. So you'll send them a Slack message so that they can respond. And Marielle and I did that all the time working together. We'd Slack one another, and then when the other person was done, you'd stand up, go over and be like, okay, you want to show me that now? So, people are throwing things, using Jira. Jira is a great project management tool, screen sharing. It's really, really useful. There's so many useful tools, Terrence. It's hard to prescribe any, because it's so personal what works for your team. But I would play around with a lot. There's very few to me that work as well as a whiteboard with Post-its on it. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll have in my office a whiteboard with Post-its, and I'll also put it up online in one of these other tools. But I like to have the visual. I like that tactile, even when I'm remote.
Hi there. My name is Prasad.
Hey, Prasad.
Hi, Todd. I have two questions. So number one is, how do we handle the sprint backlog?
How do you handle the sprint backlog? Again, it also depends on the team. So Scrum is not prescriptive in that way. It is, so it's often, that's why it's often combined with Kanban, where you have your sprint backlog. So you have your product backlog, then your sprint backlog, and then it goes through in production. It's often used in a very similar way to that. But other people do it differently. They'll have it like, tools like Jira, where you can just check out one of the cards when you're working on it. And so who, or you can assign people to it. So it really depends on the team, but it's somewhat similar to the Kanban, where it goes from backlog to in progress to testing, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. One more question.
Sure.
Where and how do I keep track of the team burn down?
Yeah, we didn't go through burn down and burn up charts, which are oftentimes used in Scrum. And just because, you see, I already hit an hour, right? So there was only so much that I can go through. But in Scrum, they often use these charts called burn down and burn up charts, and they're kind of different ways of showing the same thing. But a burn up is basically like you have certain certain tasks, right? And those tasks are maybe increasing over time, or sorry, the number of tasks completed is increasing over time. And you have a rate at which, an ideal rate at which that would happen, right? If you could continually do these, it would be, a nice flat rate. And what happens is you're always going to be under that, right? Because you can't, you can only, you can't be doing things constantly, right? It takes time. So you end up with like a step formation. And the time from when a task is assigned until it's completed, you can actually measure on these burn up charts and see like where things are lagging, when things are slowing down. Those are really good, Prasad, those are really good to have available to the developers. So if you are located, you would maybe have them on a screen, right? Like having a screen that had that dashboard on it where the developers can have visual on that at all times is really the ideal scenario. But in a work from home or remote work type situation, having it on, like in a dashboard where they can just have it as a tab open in their browser and flip over and check. But you want to give your team constant visual, constant visual feedback like that, constant access to the information. This should never be, I think it's very clear to you guys that have, that are joining me, that the idea is you want to give the developers as much ownership, as much independence, and as much information as possible, right? So it's not like 6 weeks into a project, you suddenly show them their burn down chart and are like, hey, look, you're slowing down here. Like they should constantly have that, because then they can get together and say, hey, we're slowing down. Why are we slowing down? Let's adjust. What could we be doing to be more efficient? Does that make sense, Prasad? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, but just one more thing. So end of the day, every developer, whatever user story he has been assigned to, he update the story points, right? So suppose he is assigned like a 5 point. So end of the day or a couple of days, he reduces that number to 0. That's where you keep track. That's how you keep track of the burn down, or how is it?
No, the estimate isn't what changes. It's just when a task becomes complete, there's a count of the number of tasks that are complete, a count of the number of tasks that are in progress, that have been started, and a number that are in the sprint, and a number that haven't been started. So it's kind of like a stacked line graph, and then you have just this kind of one-to-one line that would be the ideal rate. And then what you end up with is kind of a stepped graph. And when those steps start to become deeper, that's when so if it's like, sorry, it's if you have like these really shallow steps, your team is cranking. When you get these really deep steps where it's really moving away from that one-to-one line, then you see, oh, the team is slowing down. And it's just natural, because some of the tasks are quick and easy. Some of the tasks take a little longer. So you just have to, but by the end, you should hit that one-to-one line, right? You should catch up to that by the end of the sprint, if you complete the sprint on time.
Okay, thank you. I think it's the number of tasks completed versus in pending for each developer. That's what gets updated every day, right? And
right.
every user story has the number of tasks which the developer gets picked up, right? Okay.
Well, yeah, you can do it per developer. You can also do it per team. So some will just show how the team is doing. It really depends on your methodology. So in Scrum, it's not about the developer and how fast the developer is working. It's really about the team. But that's, think about when you have a team that's co-located, right? Like, 5 of us working in a pit with desks all put together, and one board, and, it's all about the velocity of the team. Whereas if you are hiring, 6 remote developers that are all kind of working more independently, you want to know the velocity of each independent developer. But that's not so agile, right? It's more agile to have that to have that single cohesive team.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
I got a question right here.
Hey, James.
I know we still have the hackathons happening this October, the end of October, between October 23rd and 25th. Are we going to use any of these concepts, the development concepts like Agile or Kanban?
That's strictly up to your team. So every team during the hackathon works independently. So the hackathon that James is referring to through South Florida Tech, what all of you guys should attend. It's a really great event. You will break yourselves. You will be put into or break yourselves into teams of 6. Your team can employ whatever techniques your team wants to employ, James. So that would be up to you. And it's something that maybe you would suggest to your team, like, hey, let's, I'm going to create a Kanban board for us, and let's break this into tasks. And I'm sure depending on who your team's made up of, they might be familiar with those methodologies already. But it'd be good practice for you for sure, James.
That'd be great. And it's a good thing I'm taking some courses right now to get myself in prime condition.
Jason.
Hi, yeah, so I have a question in regards to the Kanban board. So I
Sure.
seen for like the planning category, right? As she said, you do a card game with the team for estimation, right?
Yeah, it's called planning poker. To be honest, I've actually never done it quite like that with the cards, but it sounds more fun when you do it that way, right?
Yeah, and so if you're doing planning poker and you get the estimation for that task, does the PM still does the planning essentially, right? You still need somebody at a high level still doing the planning, or does the team take that over because you have the like you said in Scrum, you want everybody that contributes is at the team skill set. Do you give that person that trust, or do you still have a PM that operates at a high level?
Yeah, it depends a bit on the team. So in Scrum, in true Scrum, that is within the team, right? So what basically the way I've seen this done most frequently is the product owner or whoever's in that equivalent position in your organization would provide that product backlog. But what they'll often want to know is just an estimate on the size of those the cost basically of each one of those items. Excuse me. So the development team would play, do the planning poker and then give an estimate for each one of those tasks. Then the product owner can go and meet with the client, meet with the customer, meet with the top brass, whoever it is, and say, okay, here's how much this one's going to cost. I've also seen it done where the entire dev team was brought in and basically did the planning poker, estimating those times right in front of the whole, the CEOs and the stakeholders, so that they knew right away, okay, this is, let's rate this on how important it is, and let's rate it on how much it's going to cost. And then, we put that point on the board, and we just took every task and laid it out to a cost benefit. And then we were like, okay, these are the ones we're going to start on, and these are the ones we're going to just get off the product backlog and forget about. So I've seen it done in both ways, but ultimately what should be done, the idea, Jason, is that the dev team estimates the time, then the product owner takes those estimates and uses it to reprioritize the backlog. And then now the new reprioritized backlog, the dev team can take and say, okay, this is a sprint. And they could pull off based on, oh, okay, we have an 8, a 5, a 3, and a 3. That's 2 weeks for us. Let's pull that out and make that a sprint. And this is going to be a 2-week sprint.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and you learn, like, like, okay, last time we took, what did I say, an 8, a 5, a 3, and a 3, that's 19, right? So you're like, okay, we got 19 points last time, and we were able to do that in 10 days. This time let's see if we could do 12 points in 5 days, and you're constantly are trying to, ideally keeping track of your velocities and knowing like how many points per day you can do, kind of thing.
Okay, and then I have one last question. So like if you're moving from I'm used to using like waterfall methodology, but like if you move from waterfall to you're trying to implement like agile into a new team. I seen that you had for the categories board for the Kanban, like you had the limits, right, for each number on top. Like how long did it take to like transition? Like I guess not only transition, but like figure it out on your own. Is that like the numbers you gave initially? Is that like best practice, or did you just over time you develop those numbers?
Yeah, those numbers that I gave are not necessarily best. Don't use those numbers. Those were just somewhat arbitrary. You have to really figure those out for your team and your organization. It depends greatly on the size. A rule of thumb that is sometimes used is you take whichever you think is going to be the slowest category, and you take the size of your team and you multiply it by 1.5, right? So your slowest category, that should allow the highest number in it, and that should be your team size plus 50%, right? So you got a team of 4, that number is 6, and then everything else is less than 6, right? But yeah, Jason, I think that's one of the ideas of Agile, is that the development team should constantly be saying, hey, what can we be doing more efficiently? And it could be adjusting those WIP limits, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the great questions. You guys have awesome questions tonight. This is a great crowd. Anybody else? Neha, I see you're like ready, you're hesitating, but I feel like you want to ask something. You and Teresa.
No, I was wondering, like you said that in planning poker, developers give the story points. So, and the points goes from 0 to further up. If a task is so less time consuming and the team is giving it a 0, then what's the point of making it as a separate user story? Like you can just attach that task to a bigger user story and then do it rather than making a separate one.
Yeah, I think that's somewhat frowned upon. I think that you want to keep those tasks separate. But those 0 pointers are just, they're great wins. We loved in our office when we were using the Kanban methodology, we were kind of using like a hybrid, more of a Scrumban, but we loved watching those cards move across the board. So those 0 pointers are such good wins. They make everyone,
They're like smooth goers.
Yeah, the investors in the company are walking past and they're seeing all those cards moving, and it feels really good. So you don't want to combine those. You want to keep those in there, but you can stack, you stack a bunch of those into your sprint, so you can knock those out quickly and show like a high velocity. It just looks good. It feels good. So don't discount the gamification of this also, right? That feel good aspect of getting those cards moving across, and we used to put names on who did it, or sometimes we would put like, we'd have like the Todd row, the Mariella row, the other, and like Mariella would be famous for taking those 0 pointers or 1 pointers, and so she'd have like a giant wall of cards, and we knew that she was doing a bunch of small tasks, but it was still so meaningful because to the product owner, it's a task. It's something that it's a feature that needs to be added. So when they just see a stack of cards, they don't care if they're 0 1 point cards. They just see, oh, look at all of these features we added, or look at all these defects we fixed. And it has such a positive psychological effect that really I want to make sure you don't discount that.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. All right, anybody else? Any last minute questions? I think my food just got here, so I'm ready to cut it short. But Teresa, you look like you got one more. I'm gonna give you the last question if you want it, because you were like,
I hope it's fast. So in my particular organization, there's this like unspoken rule of thumb that we should never point a user story more than 8. We use the Fibonacci scale or whatever. And I was just wondering if that is rooted in any sort of like evidence, you know, or is that just some, you know, whim that we've decided to implement?
I think a little bit of both. You know, if you think about the philosophy that I said, you know, if a user story is a 13, that's really getting into an epic, right? And it should really be broken down into smaller tasks, right? So I completely support that idea, that not, you know, if the idea is that you never want to rate it higher than an 8 because somebody's going to be upset, then that's not necessarily a great methodology. But if the idea is that if a story is a 13, we should break it into smaller stories, then that's a really great idea. So that's what I would very much support that. The other, you know, but then again, you know, it really, you know, so your 8 might be Niha's 13. You know what I mean? Like they're arbitrary anyway. So we, you know, most teams end the scale at 13, even though the Fibonacci sequence continues on. You know, yours is just deciding to end it at 8. Or is your team saying at 13, let's break it up into smaller pieces?
At 8, yeah. They want to break it up. Okay, I guess there's some logic behind that. So
yeah. Oh, and Jason, I just wanted to actually make one more comment towards you. If you're using waterfall, you need to switch to agile. Your company is doomed to fail. You know, you're not going to be able to compete against another company using agile if you're using waterfall.
Okay,
So
no,
that's
yeah, because I was so I worked as a PM in healthcare, and we're doing things like very traditionally, right? The projects there,
yeah.
slow and pace. And now I'm starting my own project, and I'm like, okay, let me switch to some type of agile framework, I guess. And yeah, I've done some online, you know, courses, but I don't know how to implement it. And so, but you've given me some really great concrete advice on how to like go about real work.
That makes me feel good.
Yeah.
One last piece of advice that I'm going to leave you guys all with, okay, is this. And this is something that I was told recently about agile methodologies and Scrum and Kanban and all this stuff. And I really think it's important, is that these things take a long time to get right. There's a philosophy in martial arts called shuhari that's often spoken about with agile. And it's actually shu-ha-ri. And the idea is, shu is like when you're first learning martial arts, you just do it exactly the way the instructor teaches you, like to the letter. And then ha is like, once you start to really learn it, you can kind of start to slowly adapt how you're doing it. And then ri is when it's like just you're living and breathing it, right? And the idea with agile methodologies, whether you do Scrum or Kanban or some kind of hybrid or some other methodology, is just implement it as best you can and then stick with it for a period of time. Give yourself a month. Don't just try it for a week and be like, this isn't working, but give yourself a month or 90 days even. And because it's going to take time. You know, it's like if you go for like, you want to learn the piano and you take one lesson and you're like, I can't do this, right? No one ever learned to play the piano in one lesson, right? No one ever learned to play, you know, football in an hour, right? You need to try and try. So give yourself time to really implement this and learn it and see how it works with your company and just stick with it. And then once you feel like you really understand it, then you can adjust it and adapt it to, you know, to use it better. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Hit me, you know, send me an email or I'll reach out to you guys through Meetup. Please please join our Slack. Also, if you go to bocacode.com, one click to join our Slack, and you're part of our family, and you can always find me there. I live there. Thank you guys all. Have a great night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Hi, thank you.